What's up, friends? Mike Meiers here with the Songwriting for Guitar podcast, and you're listening to Chapter 4 from my book, The Songwriting Guitarist, Transformation in Just 15 Minutes a Day. Chapter 4, 15 Minutes a Day. Stop wasting time and start focusing on your one thing. I see it all the time that people's practice routines aren't organized. They're chaotic and messy. You're probably overloading your practices and trying to fit everything in, but can't get good at something by trying to do a little bit of everything. So focus on what matters and benefits your songwriting. Don't watch that YouTube video about shredding or sweep arpeggios. If you can't play to a metronome at various speeds and various strumming patterns as a songwriter, that's what you need to be doing. Your core job is to capture a feel, and this is where you need to start focusing. So I want to show you an example of an effective practice routine. Let's start with that voicing that I showed you at the beginning. What if you just did a root and third practice? So let's say you want to practice C major, F major, G major, and A minor. Okay, well, the first practice, I would practice C and F. Now, the reason I'm saying C and F and not all four chords is that I want you to focus on one of the changes. If I'm playing C and then going to F, I can really hone in and watch my hands move. When people do a lot of changes, I see firework hands. They play it, lift up their hand, and then next chord, lift off. When we're incorporating new shapes and new ways to play something, we need to watch the position of our fingers, that they're laying in a way that we're not catching other strings. So you need to at first learn how to make these transitions smooth and easy. And if we're focused in on one particular change and we're doing it for 5 minutes, making it sound better and more refined, and the next day we gear to maybe one of those other chord changes and also revisit what we did the day before, it gets cleaner and cleaner, and that's it. Then the practice is done. If you did this every day for the next week and kept going and didn't move on until you felt comfortable to switch, then guess what? You'd get so much better at that, and you would master that voicing and that style. But here's the thing, don't move on until it feels comfortable. So many of us have not mastered a lot of things on guitar, and we're overly anxious. Like when I see someone play and they're singing, but they're looking at their hands because now they realize, oh shoot, I wish I practiced more. I wish I had worked on that voicing. That's where it falls apart. So you do not have to move on until you feel comfortable. So if it takes a whole month for you to get comfortable with this voicing, but it sounds consistent and smooth, that's amazing and totally worth it. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, Mike, I'm more advanced, then great. This concept continues even when you become advanced. I still do this. I still focus on that one thing in small increments consistently. Through this, we're focusing our mind. We have so much going on. Part of our practice is to slow down and focus on small things, but consistently. That's what I need, and that's one thing I've stayed with. Be sure not to try to do everything at once, but chop it up into bite-sized chunks. With just 15 minutes at a time, anyone can do this and find themselves in a far more advanced position if they just take their time on their way there. These 3 elements we talked about earlier can seem very overwhelming, but they are crucial. When deciding where you need to start practicing at first, start actively listening to the genres you want to be in and sound like. I cannot stress this enough. You can know all the elements like the back of your hand, but if you aren't listening to songs over and over again, your growth will be stunted. Active listening helps us freshen or revamp our song structure and essentially fill our creative well with tons of ideas. We'll always have something to concentrate and practice when we do this. Okay, here's an example. A successful practice, if done consistently, looks like this. Let's say that new voicing, root and thirds. Cool. Day 1, chord progression, C, F, G, A minor. For 5 minutes, you're just going to go back and forth between C and F very slowly, watching your fingers, watching that transition. Then for the next 5 minutes, you're going to try F and G. Just different change. Then for the last 5 minutes, C, F, and G. Let's combine them. And that's it. Then day 2, first 5 minutes, let's practice C, to A minor, C to A minor. A minor is the new chord that we're adding in. Then let's try F to A minor, F to A minor. Then you're going to try for the last 5 minutes, G to A minor, G to A minor. Then you're going to, the next day, put everything together. Everything is slowly coming together. Now, here's the thing that I will say. Don't move on if what you hear isn't sounding good yet. Go back to where you're getting stuck. Perfect little pieces of the bigger picture. Once everything is sounding good, you can go record it. You can play with a metronome. You don't have to think about it. Then you can go ahead and move on to the next thing. You can incorporate a different strumming pattern into the progression, then add a different technique in. Keep going back to practice that progression in different ways. Next steps. Outside of your practice time, I urge you to start writing with these 3 elements in mind. Pick your genre, pick your vibe and feel. Focus on a strumming pattern you're working on, a technique and a voicing style for your chord progression, and make a 15-second pattern. It doesn't have to be anything perfect, but it just has to all make sense together. I call variations of this type of practice song starters. People come to me all the time asking how to keep coming up with truly new ideas, and this is a great way. Regardless of whether you're writing for yourself or others, when you start something, you don't want to have just one idea. You want to have multiple. If you're having trouble coming up with different song starters or feeling confident in what voicing technique or strumming pattern fits best with a particular genre, now is the time to actively listen and figure out the style you're going for. Take notes, practice, and implement. Active listening will give us ideas to practice and go off of. Just make a quick little chord progression with a certain feel to it, and then another one in a different key, and then another song starter with a vibe. All these little ideas you'll come up with are essentially like a catalyst to where you could start writing the full song. This way you can give yourself, your co-writer, multiple ideas when starting to create, as opposed to a blank slate. Challenge yourself. How many can you come up with in a week? Now, in this chapter, I talked about the 15 minutes, and the reason I say 15 minutes is so important is because I would see so many students when I was teaching, brag to me about doing an hour. I did an hour of practice. But it really was just this all over the place practice. It was sloppy. It had no organization. I think it's just we like saying an hour. But, for songwriters too, they have a very limited amount of time. We're juggling so many aspects. So if we can carve out just a small amount of time and focus on one thing, we also eliminate the excuse of, well, I don't have the time. So there are many reasons why I feel 15 minutes is it's just the sweet spot. And if we can do that consistently for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that's when we start to have a system in place. And that's when it gets really, really good. And that's where you start to see growth. Growth doesn't come through like, I did an hour or 2. No, growth comes through, hey, I showed up and did a little bit today, and I did the same thing yesterday, then I'm going to show up tomorrow. I'm going to show up the next day. That's where big waves come from. That's where big changes come from. And definitely with active listening. I talk about this over and over and over and over again. If you're, in one of my courses, if you're a coaching client of mine, the first thing we talk about is playlists. Why? Because if you're a songwriter, you're trying to write like something. You're trying to get to an end goal. And if you want a publishing deal, let's say you want to do, country pop, that's cool. Guess what? What publisher would you love to get signed by? Like Smack Songs? That's Shane McAnally's, company. What songs are they cutting? Are you listening to them? Are you understanding who they're writing for? Are you analyzing what's happening? Since I do film and TV, are you researching, what's working for film and television right now and not assuming what's working? But when we create those playlists of what working, that's like data. We're seeing like, oh, this is what's working right now. I need to understand this. I need to examine it and I need to listen to it. I'm constantly refreshing playlists. And, I would listen to them when I started creating playlists like all the time. as I was making my transition into, creating a company and doing licensing, I would still do house calls. And that drive was 45 minutes. But during those 45 minutes, I could have been like, oh, I can't do anything. But instead, I listened to my playlist. And sometimes I would listen to one song on repeat for that 45-minute drive, which I know some people are like, really? One song? Yeah. Because I'm not going to understand the nuances of that song by listening to it once or twice. Some will go like, oh, I get the gist of it. No, I don't want to get the gist of it. I want to really, really understand that. Because the more and more I listen and do active listening, my well of ideas is like all over the place. Because I can't wait for inspiration to just show up magically. I need to create that. And the only way I'm going to create that is bettering my skills by having an intentional practice time and also active listening. When you're doing those two things together, man, that is where you see waves of change. And if you stay consistent with that, guess what? That's where you see the most growth.